Hello! So today let's talk about project management. How overwhelming is it when you have to manage high risk projects or projects with high stakes and you have a lot to do with very limited time? I've had to do that myself, and today I'll dive into what I had to do during a particular project, and maybe you can take away a thing or two that you can use in your project or in your business. Now, it can be very scary, especially when you're not given a guideline or how to run this project, but you still want to deliver, whether it's in your job or whatever project it is. It could be in your business. So I was in corporate at the time, and this business was really big. Very big, doing billions of pounds. Now, they were told by HMRC that they'd be audited, and HMRC wanted to check on the risk assessment. So if you've come across this, sometimes you have to document, especially in bigger businesses, you have to document what your tax strategies are, what your tax risks are, and the processes you have in place to make sure that those risks are mitigated in a business. Also, you may have to look at things like controls and so forth, but basically you just have to design a process that's bulletproof and that makes sure that you are reporting the right tax numbers and you're doing that timelessly. So it can involve different departments, because you've got payroll who do your PAYEs and all sorts of taxes on claims, expense claims and so forth. And then you have other departments, so you can have finance doing the numbers, but you also have maybe operations. You could have a property side of the business and you have to deal with property taxes in the business. So there can be multiple departments or multiple teams involved in your projects. So for us now, we had to do this process and design it, but we were not told when the investigation would be. So essentially HMRC just said, we're coming to do an audit. We can't tell you when yet, but just be prepared, and we'd like to see ABCD processes and what you've documented, what you have in place. Now, this wasn't because there was anything wrong. They were just doing their routine checks. There was also a contact manager that I was in touch with constantly, so I kind of knew exactly what they'd be looking for and what they would want to see. Now, it happens right before another deadline we had in the business. HMRC notifies us and says, we will be looking at your processes in 30 days from that point. 30 days to document processes that we had never documented before. Now, don't get me wrong, there are multiple processes, as you can imagine, with businesses. There's multiple processes, but this was high pressure because you can't fail an HMRC audit. The implications are big. The publications are not great. And also what it means is the auditors, because this is an audited business, the auditors will just have their alarm bells go tee tee tee, and they want to look for all sorts of things because they want to be on the right side and want to explain why they haven't seen any issues. So it's just a lot of work for everyone. But at the same time, another issue that I was dealing with was that we didn't have enough resources to pull this off. So not enough resources. There's quite a few challenges in just this project. It's meeting, like delivering the project in time, but also having the sufficient resources to deliver it. So as you may know, some projects or some businesses may be understaffed, or there's just so much work to do, and sometimes not enough people with the right skills. And so there were not enough people to help with this project. So that's another challenge again that was on the table. But then again, it wasn't just a project that was to be done by one team. It had to involve a lot of teams because the process flowed from one department to another. So it was quite a complex process with multiple teams and multiple people. And you know, when you're working with people that don't have the same sense of urgency as you, they don't treat it with much priority, so they may not want to play along, and that can be a challenge as well, which seemed like it would be a challenge, especially in this project. But at the end of the day, things need to get done. What did I do? So essentially, and this is something that you can also use if you want to use a checklist, and this is something that you can also implement in your projects, how I went about it. So when we were notified, what I had to do, because I knew that a lot of people had to be involved and a lot of people have different work schedules or deadlines that they're also dealing with that have nothing to do with this project, the very first thing I had to do was to set up a meeting with all the key players. So first thing you want to do is to involve everyone who needs to be on that project. They may not be on your team, so they may not have the same priorities. So you want to make sure that you involve them right at the start, because if you start a project without the right people involved, some people can choose not to participate later, or they can just cause chaos. We know those people that want to be the center of attention in anything. So you want to involve them right at the start. And so I called a meeting and I made sure everyone was aware of what was happening, the reasons that this was happening, happening. And I also had someone, come in to explain in simpler terms exactly what it is we were trying to do. Someone who'd give me a buy-in. So if you have a person who has higher authority than you, that would help, because that gives people buy-in in terms of the importance of this particular task or of this project. So I had that initial meeting. What I then had to do was to lay out a plan of how we had to do the work. So I had to break it down into phases, because that way you are monitoring each process or each phase in small bits, rather than waiting until the end and realizing that something wrong has happened right from the start. So I broke it into phases. What are the deliverable phases that you have in your project that can be looked at in just that small bit? So you break that into phases, and then you look at the people that are going to be involved in that. So maybe not all players or not all team members will be involved. Let's say in the first phase you only have maybe 3 or 4 people that are working on that, but breaking down that phase helped me to get a clear picture of what the timelines would look like. Now after that, I then went to the timeline. So I'm working backwards. I know the deadline that we've been given is a specific date. Now you don't work with the deadline that you've been given. You set an internal deadline, if you want to call it, just in case things go wrong. Now a lot of you have probably managed projects. You know there's going to be overruns, something happens, or you go over budget or whatever. And if you set your deadline as the final deadline, then you're going to miss it, and it's going to have its own repercussions. So you set yourself an internal deadline, and then you work backwards. Each phase set a deadline again. So you're setting deadlines for each phase. Now sometimes it may be difficult to fit each phase into the small time period because of the amount of work that needs to be done. How many other people can help on that particular phase if it helps move it quicker? Also, while you have phases, can the work in the other phases be done in the background? Now, some work may not be dependent to each other. So let's say phase 2 may not necessarily be dependent on phase 1, or some tasks in phase 2 may not be dependent on some tasks in phase 1. Can that start happening in the background? So what I did after breaking that down into phases and timelines is I then sat with the people and communicated what the timelines would look like. Again, I already know what I want to do, but I want to make these people feel involved. So I'm going to ask for their input and see what we can have on the table. That way you're also working with their timelines, you're working with their own personal commitments, so you're not crushing into what people are doing, and you have that conversation as teams or as micro teams, if you want to call them. So I had those conversations with the people, and that helped set some structure to what we were going to do. Now, once you've set a structure, it's easy to assign tasks. Again, you may not have the sufficient resources, but this is the part where you need to think about who's taking care of what and who's qualified at doing what. You don't want someone who's overqualified to do a certain task, because then you're not being efficient. If they can work on something else, if there's nothing else for them to work on, then that's fine, they can do that. But you just want someone who can do a good job, obviously higher than just satisfactory, but a decent job at that particular task, and allocate that to them. Review as you go. So another thing I would advise you to do is to review even the smaller tasks and make sure that you're understanding. I had to get these people, because they're in different departments, to document their processes, so they're part of the process. Now they're documenting what they do, who they talk to, what controls they are, what a typical day in that process looks like, who do they have to speak to, which systems they're using. And once I look at that, and I would go in and try to understand that. If I cannot understand their process, because I don't do that day-to-day task, if I can't understand their process, then another person who's not in that project or who's not in that business is not going to understand it. So it needs to be toned down. Whatever you're documenting, however you're managing, you need to be able to explain it, or to, walk someone through that project, and they should be able to understand it. That's when you know that it's been understood clearly. So I had to review the different processes, made sure that they made sense and that they are aligned. Now, the next phase would have been to review with the wider team. So smaller teams have documented their processes, what the structures were currently like. The next phase was to review and suggest certain controls that had to be in place, and these were, for me, controls were as stated, in your accounting standards or in tax law or tax practices, what good should look like. So that second part was reviewing and then suggesting what things should look like. Now, it's not just a one-way conversation. Again, I had to bring them back in and have the conversations, and we would talk through. Now, with these processes, they would deliver, so they would narrate their own processes and almost present their own process to the rest of the team. And what this does, when you delegate that kind of work, people take accountability for what they are doing. You're not only imposing and you're not taking the work from them, but they're actually being accountable for their own piece of work. No one wants to deliver a terrible job. So they're going to do a good job and make sure that it's the right way, because they're the ones who are going to be presenting it. Also, they want to be ready for any questions. So what that helps is someone with a different perception or a different point of view can come in and ask questions, and they ask the right person. So the right questions are asked to the right person, and that person can respond and give the right information. And so it might take longer, but it's more efficient and you're nailing things as they should be. One thing I should also highlight is that when I was planning out, I had to put in time in people's diaries. Now, it might seem like a small thing, but it helps people manage their time. So it helps you, the project owner, manage your time, but it also holds people accountable, because it's not just a deadline on paper. It's a deadline that they have in their calendar, and they know that they have to meet it. If they don't, or if they're not able to meet it, then they'll have to communicate why. So I put in time in people's diaries in terms of when the sub deadlines were, not just the big deadline, but the sub deadlines. So if it was process documentation, when was it supposed to be done? When was it supposed to be reviewed by me or whoever else? When were corrections supposed to be made? And so you put all those times in people's diaries. It will look chunky in people's calendars, but it's really helpful. So manage people's time in that way as well, and they're also accountable for what they have to deliver. Another thing that I had to do again in the process was to have regular check-ins. So check-ins are more informal, and they're not like a big meeting when you're all reviewing things. You're just checking if everything is okay, if there's any way you can support people, and also if there's any room for other people to support the rest of the team, because some people may have capacity. So for example, you can have, and I speak in finance terms specifically, but you can have someone who sits in accounting that has capacity. They can help someone in payroll document that process, because maybe they have audit experience, so they know exactly what the audit process should look like or what the documentation should be there. So you are going to look at the people in the team, so in the full team, who has capacity and who can be able to assist the other person. But that only comes because you're having regular conversations, not just formal meetings, but informal check-ins to see if there are any issues, if there are any delays. Sometimes some people struggle. Now, people are different. Some people struggle and they sit on that issue without even communicating. If you don't check in, you're not going to know that's what's happening. So have those regular check-ins. They'll definitely help as you project manage, and you can also give a good update to whoever needs it. If you have a superior advisor, if you have a higher authority or a manager or a supervisor that you're reporting to, you can give them good updates, because while you're not doing everything, you have good oversight of what's happening. Another thing as well that I would point out that I was doing throughout all these meetings was taking notes. As simple as that, because notes, you can share them with the rest of the team. Now, I know a lot of people are still writing notes on paper, which is great, but sometimes you can miss something. So automate some of these processes. Have an AI tool that can transcribe meetings. It's taking notes while you are paying attention to whoever is speaking and you're asking the right questions in the meeting. Then you can share the notes, because not everyone takes notes the same way. If you have some form of system that's transcribing the notes, this can capture everything while all of you do the talking and you share the meeting notes with everyone. It can also be a point of reference in case maybe, let's say, your documentation is incomplete or has left out certain bits. It can also be a point of reference to say that this was what was said and this is how it can be improved. Suffice it to say that it was a very tough and high-stake job because of the authorities and the party that we wanted to report to, which was HMRC, but we did deliver in time because of all of those things that I've listed. Now, these are things that you can take away, but projects will be different, so make sure you are designing it or tailoring it to your own projects. We managed to deliver in time. The other benefits, other than delivering it in time, was also that now we had a full process for that particular particular issue in the business fully documented. We had never had it before. Even with multiple audits each year, we almost just went by without having to document that. But now we had a full process. It included, flow diagrams, actual process documentation, and you can then use this to design a policy. If you want to design a policy, you can assess what your risks are, and it's all documentation that you can keep going back to if you need to, and you can revise. You can also share with other people that need to look at it. Let's say if you have auditors or external parties or stakeholders, you can share that with them. You have a good audit trail of what's happened. Another benefit as well was that it really promoted a good team spirit. So because all of the parties were involved, no one felt left out. Everyone felt like their input was really valued, and that's really key if you're working on a project with multiple people. You want to show the appreciation on the work, or appreciation for the work that people have done. You also want to value their input, say the thank yous that you need to say, recognize people because of all the hard work that they're doing, whether they're doing a good job or not. If they're not doing a good job, hopefully you would have said that, during the process and not right at the end. But at the end of the day, they have participated, they have contributed, you have increased that team spirit, and you have motivated them to work with you even more. So when another project comes along, you're the right person they want to work with because you know how to manage the project well. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope you can use it in your projects, and all the best. Thanks for watching.